overseas vacations. The board is fully staffed, and we will continue to process your application exactly as we have in the past. There's just one schedule change, and that is we have combined the August 12th hearing with the August 19th hearing, so anything that was scheduled for the 12th will be heard on the 19th. With that, let's begin review session.
Good morning. This is the Board of Standards and Appeals Public Review Session for July 14, 2014. We'll begin with the special order calendar. Subject items, item number 1, 2496BZ, 213 Madison Street, Manhattan.
The brackets. Should we have them bring the brackets to us? The same thing happened with this case 5 years ago, if you recall. It was a signage question. They had them take down the banners. They got their extension of term, then the banners went back up. So now, apparently there was misunderstanding. There was the larger flagpole structure over the center of the building, but then also in the front there were 2 sets of banners. Are we agreed that we want all 3 of those banners down?
Correct. Yes.
Commissioners?
Absolutely.
Fine. I'd like to move this case, so hopefully we can have the staff communicate that to the applicant. Anything else on that item? Okay. Next.
Item number 2, 2801BZ, 663, 673 Second Avenue, Manhattan.
I don't think we were waiting for anything. Any issues? Okay.
Item number 3, 34102BZ, 231 East 58th Street, Manhattan.
Okay, for this case, it's my understanding that we will agree to eliminate the term, but will not change any of the other terms and conditions of the grant. Everyone happy with that?
Yes.
Good.
Continued hearing items, item number 4, 42770BZ, 3801 and 3805 Beach Channel Drive, Queens.
Commissioner Martinez, I think you had some of your questions or suggestions for this application.
Right, they suggested, they've planted quite a few trees, and they suggested that the street trees would not be required because of the power lines. I'm not adverse to granting that. They also have to reduce their signage, which seems to be the remaining sticking point. I understand that the oil is aluminum, so I don't see why they just can't paint out the signage that's non-compliant. And as far as the illuminated signage, I think it's only slightly over the 50 square feet, but it seems to be reasonable and all related to the Gulf station, so I would not be averse to allowing that. So I think this case has gone on for a long time.
Right, it came in January. Initially, I think it was portrayed as a business that had been severely hurt by Superstorm Sandy, so we tried to move it quickly, but it seems to have gotten stuck along the way. Are there any other issues other than those that Commissioner Martinez raised? All right, let's see if we can get the applicant to bring this to conclusion. Next.
Item number 5, 18696BZ, 142-2125 Liberty Avenue, Queens.
Commissioner Applebaum, I think you had a question on the signage here.
Yes, I had stated basically in the other hearing that I thought that the signage exceeded C1 signage, and they did assure us that it will be compliant with C1 signage once they remove that yellow temporary sign, which they are contacting the owner of that storefront to have that done. And they also made a statement though that they'll be installing new signage, but they assure us that that will also be compliant with C1 signage. So I would assume a grant that actually details that would probably serve a little bit.
So if we got an assurance from the applicant tomorrow, would we be comfortable closing this case?
If we can detail what the new signage is and make sure that it's compliant, I would.
I think what's going to happen is they'll be able to give us dimensions, because I think what's happening is they're getting new tenants. So they're going to be, we're going to need the content. We just need compliance. Okay, any other issues on this case?
No.
Okay. Next one.
Item number 6, 4797BZ, 7902 Flatlands Avenue, Brooklyn.
Okay, I had raised a signage question at the last hearing on this because the prior grant said that all the signage can only front Flatlands Avenue and not be on East 78th through 79th Street. It turns out there's a portion of signage that's on 78th Street is part of the right-hand signage, but when we all looked at it, we saw that it really faces just a parking lot, and it's not illuminated, and it's not facing a residence. So, given fact that it's a well-maintained small shopping center, I don't see any reason they can take that particular sign down. People comfortable with that? And Commissioner Martinez, I think you had another question.
I had asked about the storage, and I think also Commissioner Henson had asked about the storage container. I don't think I've explained what that's for, and I read the hearing resolution, and in that resolution, we also gave them a waiver for providing less than the required parking, so I'm concerned that they're removing a parking space, and we haven't really explained why.
For the storage container?
Yes.
It takes up the parking place. All right, we'll have them clear that up, but, any other issues?
They seem to have removed the graffiti, which was good, but I agree with Commissioner Montanez, they didn't really explain what the additional container was.
Okay, they also supplied us a letter from their bank and a letter from Rite Aid that set forth the difficulties they were having with lease renewals due to the existence of the term. Are we comfortable in eliminating the term? Do we get it done?
Yes.
Okay. I don't think there are any other issues, so if we can get those minor questions answered, we may be able to close this tomorrow as well. Next.
Item number 7, 16000BZ, 24404 Francis Lewis Boulevard, Queens.
Okay. Commissioner Martinez.
My concern previously was that they're supposed to be providing 5 parking spaces in one of the areas where they have assigned parking. They've actually installed 3 vacuums and a corner, I believe, at the car rental. So my question was, how can we fit all the parking and also provide access through the curb cut? My understanding is they're going to remove 1 vacuum. If they could provide us a revised site plan that shows that the curb cut is not obstructed, I would be okay with that.
Any other issues?
And we're going to install landscaping behind the vacuums, which was previously, BSA approved plans.
Okay. Good.
Item number 8, 2403BZ, 17802 Union Turnpike, Queens.
Okay, the signage is as represented on the revised plans. They proposed planting 4 8-foot-tall evergreens and additional landscaping to address the concerns that were raised in the prior hearing. Any questions? Any other issues? Okay. So we should be able to close this one as well. Okay, new cases.
New cases, item number 9, 76550BZ, 143036 Union Court Road, the Bronx.
Okay. Questions or issues? Commissioner Hinkson.
I just had a couple of questions. In your statement, I think it's on page 1, it reads that there's no embalming on the premises, but they have several sheets that show the plan and show an embalming room, so if they could just fix that one way or the other.
Well, not a typical zoning question.
Not a typical zoning question, but
Discrepancies with noting.
I don't know the rules about embalming, but it probably is or something one should look at. And then are there any photos of the parking lot in the rear? If they could add that.
Which one would that? So,
Actually, right to the site, and the parking lot is overgrown. So there are some cars on the lot, but it really needs some tidying up and some landscape refreshing and perhaps even some pavement refreshing because there's grass growing up through the pavement and it's a mess back there. And that's the part of it that actually faces the residences. It's right across the street and it's a narrow street.
all right. We'll have to address that. Any other issues? Any next?
Item number 10, 8892BZ, 3007 East Tremont Avenue, the Bronx.
All right, this is the dining. It seems to be a neighborhood favorite. Everybody loves it. The council likes it. But there are some questions about their parking, which I don't believe is under our jurisdiction because it's across the street. Any particular questions with regard to that?
Well, I'm not sure if we have jurisdiction over that, but it would be helpful perhaps if it was striped, because the parking lot is not striped. And currently pretty much people fall into some sort of formation, but, you can park anywhere in any direction that you want it. And not only that, the portion of the lot that does front the homes should have a little bit better landscaping. Right now, it's a very narrow, well, not very narrow, like a couple of feet wide, but a grass patch, and then it's the backyards of people's homes.
Okay. So we should try to get them to clean it up. Technically, it's not under our jurisdiction.
And perhaps in their papers, they could just either make it clear that parking is really not in our jurisdiction, because they sort of mentioned the 2004 grant in which the parking, I guess, was taken out of the grant, and the facts and findings in a couple of places, they still mention, 5,000 square feet of parking that they were supposed to have or could have. So if they could just clean up their papers in that regard. But also, they've got a yard that's adjacent to the kitchen that seems to be roofed with a metal roof, and it's enclosed. And I'm wondering if that has been included, or should it be included in floor area, and if they could explain that a little bit.
Can you say that it's enclosed? Is it?
Well, it's roofed, and it appears that the building provides at least one or two sides to that area. And therefore, it would be considered more than 50% enclosed. And on one side, it's just got a chain link fence, which I believe is probably slatted. So indeed, it may be they're totally enclosed, so if they could take a look at that. And also, in our conditions previously, we mentioned that all the HVAC equipment needed to be, I guess, on the original roof and not on the addition roof. And I would just like them to clarify whether or not there's been HVAC equipment that's kind of migrated.
Okay. Any other issues? Mr. Bennett?
Item number 11, 15207 BC, 8701 Portland Avenue, Brooklyn.
Okay. This is a PCV special permit. I think each of the commissioners had some questions. Commissioner Altamez, you want to go first?
Yes, they're supposed to have sprinklers installed. I would like them, I don't have their CMO currently. What's holding it up is anything to do with the sprinklers, because they should have been installed and tested. And it wasn't clear to me whether or not they had any ADA access and whether the DOB was requiring that.
Okay. Mr. Altamez?
Yes, this is a corner lot, and I believe it would be helpful if they could break their signage down by frontage.
Okay, that's reasonable.
And the applicant is stating that they're in substantial compliance, but they have two outstanding ECBs for bathrooms in the cellar.
Yes.
So that clearly they are out of compliance. If they could adjust their statements, and I'd like to know the status of the ECBs.
Right, also they claim that although they don't have the city road yet, that they're working with DOB, and I'd like some details on the sort of a status report of where they stand on that. Okay? Anything else? For the appeals calendar?
As cases, decision items, item number 12, 4507A, 1472 East 19th Street, Brooklyn.
I believe this is, the resolution for this is a 2-year extender, is that correct, council? Yes, okay. I don't think we were waiting for anything on this. Any issues?
I had requested that they give us a slightly more detailed statement of facts and findings, which they did do, and they made corrections to a couple of factors that they had stated in 2 different paragraphs, different numbers. So we're fine now.
Item number 13 to 6607A, 1602, 1610 Avenue West, Brooklyn.
Similarly, we're not waiting for anything. We asked them to clean up the lot. Hopefully they're doing that. This is also a 2-year extender.
Correct.
Any other issues? Okay.
Continued hearing items, item number 14, 80-11A, 84-85-11A, and 103-11A, East 9th Street, Manhattan.
Okay, we've received a submission from the applicant, and I believe that there are additional questions that have been raised by that submission. Commissioner Montanez, do you want to go first?
Yes, I have a question regarding the fire stopping and concerns regarding waiving the fire stopping requirements. And I was just thinking of how the DOB handled this in the past when they were doing these MDL waivers, although they were not authorized to do it. And I looked at the plans for 515 East 5th Street, and I noticed that in those plans, all the interior dwelling units, the walls and floors were demolished. And in the notes on the drawings, it said that all concealed spaces shall be fire stopped. So in my reading of that particular case, DOB did not waive any fire stopping requirements for that building. And I just feel a similar treatment is warranted in this case.
Okay.
I would have to agree. I know that they gave us a detail of proposed fire stopping, and I'm glad that they, in a sense, were trying to comply. However, I do have concerns about the detail that they did show us. They are proposing a caulking method that, under other circumstances, actually would probably be fine and would be acceptable, but it looks like what they've given us is really for curtain wall application and not the kind of application that exists in this building. They also have given us a detail that doesn't really comport with the design of the building. We're talking about walls that are adjacent to the residential units that abut the public hallway. That condition is really a wood joist and versus a concrete slab, which is what they're showing us. So I have concerns about how they've actually shown the detail, but they have this caulking on the exterior of the wall. And if you go and take a look at the specification for the caulking, it's really not rated to have that sort of exterior application.
What's referred to as the elastic electric sealant.
True.
And that does not have DOB anywhere under, or?
It may, but I don't believe that the application that they are using it in currently is applicable to what we're looking for. It can be used in sort of an assembly, and it looks like it's used sort of internally in a wall assembly, but they're looking at it sort of externally. So they've given us a detail of sheetrock. They end the sheetrock at a certain point, and then add this layer of caulking between the sheetrock and the underside of the slab, without having anything sort of protecting that caulking. And so I would like them to sort of go back, maybe take a look at the detail in the spec, and come back to us.
Could I ask the question? So do you mean that it would have been fine if it was injected into the wall space? Is that what you're saying?
Possible, but if you go online and you take a look at the specifications and the details that this is rated for and what the system is to be used for, it's not the same as what they're proposing to us. So I think if they can look at something that is more akin to what the actual condition is, that's something we can look at.
Yes, it seems that the manufacturer recommends using this against metal or concrete, but this situation is wood.
Okay.
Yeah.
So we'll have to get some further clarification from the applicant on those questions.
Thank you.
Next item.
Item number 15, 10314A, 55 Exit Street, Brooklyn.
Okay, they revised the financials to indicate what the redesign of the building would cost, and also what the serious loss would be with regard to rental income. Are people satisfied with those corrections?
Yes.
Okay, so I guess we can probably move this item.
Yes.
Okay. New cases.
New cases, item number 16, 9214A, 797th Avenue, Manhattan.
Okay, this is an NBL waiver case where they seek to have the distance from the transient hotel room windows to be 20 feet rather than 30 feet from the proposed new residential tower building that's being built. And while I thought it was a clearly written and very straightforward application, I know that several of you have questions. Commissioner Hudson?
Just a couple. It wasn't clear to me, they talk about 169 windows requiring this waiver. And out of that 169 are all operable and all would be impacted by a narrower court. So if they could talk about that. Also, I was wondering if they had thought about sort of an in-between solution, a 25 by 25 court as opposed to, I guess they've given us a solution for 30 and then 20 and then 20 and 20, but I'm wondering if there's something in between that could...
So that would be less?
Would be less, and probably maybe their structural problems would might disappear under that condition. So if they could kind of talk about that, that would be great.
Anyone else, Commissioner Martinez?
Yes, the front of the building has a setback, and then the facade rises at a slope.
Bringing up the new construction tower.
Construction, yes, and they give us an economic analysis based on floor plans. I just wanted for them to clarify for me that slope is a zoning requirement, not a design element.
Okay. Commissioner O'Donnell, any questions?
Yeah, I just want to ask whether or not they can clarify whether or not there would be mechanical ventilation systems in place because of the reduced light there to those rooms.
For the transient hotel rooms. Right.
Yes.
Okay. All right. I think those questions can probably be answered tomorrow. Okay.
Zoning calendar decision items, item number 17, 297-13BZ, 408 Cooper Street, Brooklyn.
Unfortunately, we will have to defer the decision on this again as we did for about 60 days because there are unresolved issues. First, I believe we'll do is that correct? Okay.
Item number 18, 15-14BZ, 12-03 150th Street, Queens.
Okay, this is the Greek Orthodox School enlargement. They appear to have worked out their parking and congestion issues with the community groups and council. And I think we're ready to go on this. Any outstanding issues? Okay, next.
Item number 1957-14BZ, 1 New York Plaza, Manhattan.
I don't think there are any unresolved matters here. Okay.
Continuing hearing items, item number 20, 311-12BZ, 964 Dean Street, Brooklyn.
I think you had a question on storage, the cellar storage, the value of the cellar storage.
Right, yeah, the only question that remains to me, because they did satisfy my questions regarding the financials in terms of showing how the efficiency rate actually went up as the amount of residential floors increased because of because you no longer needed to have long hallways that connected to the extra means of egress. The only remaining question I had was whether or not the income from the cellar storage was factored into any of the office rent comparables or the residential sales prices, because they don't mention it at all.
Okay. Any issues?
Item number 21, 2-13BZ, 438 Taji Street, Staten Island.
Applicants asked for adjournment on this.
Item number 22, 254-13BZ, 2881 North Trent Avenue, Brooklyn.
Okay. We have a revised proposal here. And the way it didn't really seem to go far enough, and I'm still not convinced that we're reaching the minimum variance required for this property. And I'm beginning to get the feeling that we're being asked to play let's make a deal on this. We're playing out on the margins and making some minor changes that I don't think really get to the crux of the matter. Commissioner O'Donnell?
I absolutely agree with you. At the last hearing, one of the statements that I made was that I thought that the type of building that they were proposing, which was a building with apartments and a core and an elevator, were part of what was driving the costs up, requiring that they have an even larger building. And so I had made a statement then that it looked as if they would perhaps go back to the as-of-right single-family and two-family homes, which almost came very close to being feasible, and they consider perhaps adding a unit or two, or perhaps even another two-family home, they might actually find that they could have a feasible development. Now, I did see their new proposal, and I looked at the construction costs per unit, and the base construction costs per unit go down very slightly from the old report, but it's clear when you actually compare it to the base construction costs per unit for the two-family homes, it's almost double. So that to me reinforced my view that if they just pursue a simpler type of building, one that does not have a central core, like maybe 3 or 4 two-family homes that are adjacent to each other, they'll keep the construction costs down and they can actually make this a feasible development. In this case, they should show us something like that and show us why it doesn't work.
I also think that with your proposal, the amount of remediation is reduced significantly.
Absolutely, because right now, with the 3 two-family homes and the 1 single-family home, I believe it's only $700,000 roughly because the footprint is smaller. So let's see how much it goes up incrementally if you add another two-family home and you turn the 1-family home on the other end into a two-family home.
Other commissioners have comments?
I think at the last hearing they stated that they had double counted, I think, excavation and support between the environmental estimates and the financial, but I don't really see that they have corrected those numbers. And as far as the sea founding in their proposal, I don't really think it fits in the sea founding, no front yard, no landscaping, etc.
Anything else? All right. We'll give this case another shot, I think, to make some changes that will accurately reflect the comments the commissioners have made. Next.
Item number 23, 256, 259, 13DZ, and 260, 263, 13A, Sheridan Avenue, Staten Island. I'm still waiting for DOT.
Okay, I think that's the only remaining item here, because I think the site value was corrected. I think some other minor corrections were made to the financials, but it's really unclear, A, what DOB is asking for, and B, how it's going to be provided. I mean, when I read it, it sounded like they wanted a permanent easement in someone's driveway so that, the general public could pull in and pull out. I don't think that's reasonable. I don't know why DOT would ask for it. So, if we get some sign-off from DOT, we could possibly close this case.
But I think we need some clarification of what they're looking for exactly.
Right, because originally we thought it was a cul-de-sac, but there's really not room for it. So, if staff can follow up with DOT on that, we would appreciate it. Okay, next.
Item number 24, 266, 13DC, 515 East 5th Street, Manhattan.
Commissioner Appleby?
Yeah, I had raised questions about the way in which they valued the site in the report during the last hearing, because they had, originally the methodology was such that they had, I believe, they used the capitalized value of the retail rents to try and figure out the value of the site value. And that was unclear. What I wanted them to do was to build the site up and basically start with vacant land, then give us the price for a 5-story building unrenovated, and then I thought that what they could do for their construction costs is add the cost of the 6th floor and the penthouse, as well as the demo cost of the penthouse, and then show us that when they got the okay to build the building up to 6 floors in a penthouse, the cost that was involved in that could not be recouped from just a 5-story building. I thought it could be really clearly stated if they kept it fairly simple. and that's not what I got.
Okay, let's see if we can get the applicant to do that, because other than that question, I don't think there are other outstanding issues on the good faith reliance question. Anyone have any?
No.
All right, so if we are to move this case, we should keep in mind that there's a companion MDL case that we need to restore to the calendar for hearing and disposition. And it's my anticipation that if we are to grant this variance, that the grant will include a timetable for the removal of the penthouse. That was declared illegal 5 years ago. Any other issues? Okay, next.
Item number 25, 27713 BZ, 1769 Fort George Hill, Manhattan.
Mr. Lisa, you have a question with regard to the parking space.
I did. I see now where they're providing parking below grade, but they're suggesting triple stackers, and my question is whether or not they've provided enough ceiling height to accommodate the stacker, plus also any sprinklers that are required to be above those stackers. So in looking at their sections, they didn't really make it clear whether or not that they've accounted for that. So I think they need to just give us a little clarity and maybe make the section a little more clear.
Okay, I think that's a fairly discrete question. Other than that, I thought that the submission was responsive to issues that were raised. The change in the mix of apartment units, I think, was moved in the right direction. I think this is in good condition. We did receive, I believe just this morning, a 1.5-page opposition letter, which I did read. I did not find anything persuasive in it. So I think this case is probably ready to move.
Especially since anything that they intend to build has to be very carefully scrutinized by the MTA.
Correct. Okay.
Item number 26, 29913 BZ, 4299 Highland Grove Road, Staten Island.
Okay, did we indicate that the new plan shows the canopy and the signage is going to be removed? Why don't we just remove it and submit a photograph that indicates that it's been taken care of? And we're also proposing a 4-foot high chain link fence. I don't think we can do better than that. Aesthetically, if what we're talking about is screening off their parking area from the adjacent residential, perhaps some plantings. I know that the parking lot regulations have some limitations on the size of plantings, but I think they can do a better job in terms of their design for that. And my final comment is that I think the C finding for the special permit, that the placement of the building relates harmoniously with the surrounding buildings, it needs to just be written out. I mean, I could dictate the 4 sentences, but I'm not going to. The applicant needs to write it in the papers. Any other comments?
Well, regarding the screening, I think the architect said that the shrubs would be a maximum of 3 feet high. And actually, they're supposed to be 4 feet when planted, and growing to 6 feet. So, and I believe the signage that they do want to retain should be detailed on the plans.
Good. Thank you.
Item number 27, 32413 BZ, 7832 138th Street, Queens.
Okay, I think the only issue here is how the attic square footage is counted and whether or not that would put them over the allowable 10% that you can get under 73621. So if they can answer that question, that they're not over the 10%, and demonstrate how they count the floor area in the attic, I think we can close and schedule a decision date for this. Any other issue?
No, that was my issue. It's great.
Okay, new cases?
Item number 28, 18513 BZ, 97 Franklin Avenue, Brooklyn.
Okay, just before we get into our comments, the applicant failed to send the required notice to the property owners within the 400-foot radius, so we can hear this tomorrow, but we will need to rehear it most likely next month, probably on the 19th of August. So I'm going to ask the substance of the case, Commissioner Applegate.
Yes, I had concerns about the uniqueness finding as well as how they detail it in the study. They talk about how they're one of 5 small, narrow, vacant lots, but they don't really, in the statement, distinguish themselves from 4 of the other lots. They kind of rely on the report to show how all of the other lots in the area that are vacant are actually used in conjunction with or co-owned with other lots that are adjacent to them. And they state they're one of 5 lots, but when you look at the report, they're really only showing that they're one of 3 lots, so it leads me to question which one is right. Is the statement right or is the report correct? And also, it's not really clear whether or not a lot of those lots are actually being used in conjunction with the other lots, because if you look at some of the photos, some of them look like they're actually vacant. Not only that, they list the ownership of the actual vacant lots, but they don't list the ownership of the adjacent lots that they're supposed to be used in conjunction with or co-owned with. So you're not really sure whether or not that can be verified. And they also don't show whether or not the uses that are in conjunction are actually legal uses. So I think they need to really flesh out the report.
Yeah, I think the lot study needs to be redone with further detail. Any other specifics? I think the residential rents appear to be low.
Absolutely, most especially for the duplex apartment. The report goes on to say how, duplexes of this size really have excess amount of space, but that's not true in this neighborhood. In this neighborhood, there are very large families, and apartments that are 3,700 square feet are most definitely in demand. So I think they really need to raise the rent on the proposed at the very least to show what they actually can get. Then we can get a better idea of what the return really will be.
Right. Staff also raised the question, which I think is a valid point, and that is, it appears from the plans that the cellar is being designed to support a 3rd unit. It extends way into the backyard. So I think they need to explain that to us.
I had a concern about that as well, because they mentioned that the cellar sort of pops up above grade. They don't exactly tell us how far above grade that is, but clearly they've got windows there. And I think that any grant that we would consider should be conditioned that DOB would have to take a look at what they were proposing in terms of being above grade in the rear.
Anything else on Franklin? Next.
Item number 29, 264-13BZ, 257 West 17th Street, Manhattan.
And I expect we'll have some testimony on this matter tomorrow. This is a PCE, a residential building. The PCE is in a space that the unit owners do not control. It's controlled by, I guess, what we'll call the sponsor. They're in litigation, which is not cause for us to delay or do anything different than we would normally do. But I think we're going to be hearing dueling acoustical reports already in record. So, specifics and questions, folks?
I guess we can make comments tomorrow, but I did find a lot of reasonableness in the Acoustalab's version of unreasonable noise, and how the noise code goes into a number of examples, but it's not limited to those examples of what unreasonable noise is. And not all the noise that the tenants are complaining about is impulsive noise. There's also music and other noise, so it's a complicated issue, and it seems that the vibrations are actually traveling up through the structure of the building, and they've tried many measures, but it seems that nothing has really completely worked.
Any other comments?
No, other than to probably hear a little bit more about the details from the acousticians.
32713BZ, 1504 Coney Island Avenue, Brooklyn, with request of an adjournment.
So it's adjourned until next week, the 22nd.
Item number 31, 3614BZ, 101 Maiden Lane, also known as 201 Pearl Street, Manhattan.
I didn't see any bad issues in this case. Anybody have any questions? Problems? All right, if that's the case, we can close this and set a decision made.
Item number 32, 4714BZ, 12221 Merritt Boulevard, Queens.
Mr. Martinez, you raised that was the most interesting question on this McDonald's drive-through.
Yes, I don't see this as being an accessory use because there's no restaurant. It's just a drive-through. There's no indoor tables. So I question whether this drive-through is accessory to anything.
I think that's a threshold question that the applicant should address. I thought the statement was well written. I thought it was clearly written by planners, not lawyers. Which sometimes is a good thing. But anyway, I do think that's a threshold question. And then there are some mechanical questions that I know Commissioner Nixon, you raised.
Yes, once I could get past the threshold question, I just had a question concerning the traffic pattern. I understand that probably the original traffic pattern was somewhat similar, but I just had questions about cars going into, I guess it's Sunbury Street or Sunbury Drive, because that's sort of the entryway into sort of the residential area, and whether or not this would cause congestion, especially if this is just predominantly a drive-through. It becomes sort of a destination for a lot of cars just to drive through, so there may actually be more cars than if it was sort of a more traditional sit-down restaurant. Plus, also, there doesn't seem to be very much landscaping in the design, and although I was actually kind of intrigued by the design, I thought it was a very interesting design. I would like to see some sort of softening of that hardscape because it is adjacent to residential.
Right. The applicant portrayed the circulation plan as being superior to what was there before. It was Kentucky Fried Chicken where there were multiple entrances on there. So to the extent that you have less in and out on there, I would tend to agree with them. But I think your questions should be answered and then the threshold. And also the landscaping. So there are a couple matters to be resolved here. Anything else? Okay, next.
Item number 33, 5514BZ, 388 Reade Street, Brooklyn. This is also a PCE.
Correct. This is in a new development, a 53-story mixed-use building. The PCE will be in the cellar on the 5th and 6th floors. Commissioner Martinez?
Yes, I noted that they have handicap access from the ground floor to the 5th floor, and then from the 5th floor to the 6th floor to actually travel into the residential portion of the building to use the elevators to get up to the 6th floor. And from other cases, there's sometimes security concerns if there's any way that they can provide elevators to the 6th floor or some other way for internal ADA access. There was they had a note on their drawing also that the fire alarm system will be connected to a central station if required by the BSA, and I hope the fire department will weigh in on that.
Okay.
Well, the fire department submitted a letter to the...
Yes, but they didn't comment on whether the fire alarm system should be connected to a central station.
Usually require that.
And I believe there's also a sixth floor terrace, an exterior space. The PCE is going to use that.
That we should find out about.
Yes.
Anything else? Thank you.
That concludes the morning review session.
Maintenance and dispatch.
That was pretty cool.
Yes, pretty forward.
Every once in a while, I just change the background from black to, as